Meowdy! The cat distribution system is hard at work again, this time delivering this cat girl to your Genshin account. She won't be staying for long though because she's got deliveries to make, bringing plant damage and powerful cardboard shields to various locations, such as Hilichurl camps or literal hell. Do be aware though that she, like other fake cat girls that could have been real, has human ears and a human footprint. I had to see it, and now you do too. In today's guide, I'll be going over everything to know about Kirara, from her best build to her best teams. Unsubscribe from Amazon Prime because Kirara's got you covered, but do subscribe to my YouTube channel for more content. And with all of that being said, my name is Braxophone, and let's talk about Kirara. I could tell you all about her scalings and basic attack animations being super cool, but that's just scratching the surface. She's not a perfect character, but at the least she'll make sure that your team is feline fine. Okay, I'm done. Kirara is a DENDRO shielder, but she also does a little bit of damage and DENDRO application that can make her usable in some different teams. When you tap her skill, she deals DENDRO damage, creates a huge shield based off her HP, and generates 3 DENDRO particles. Now, this shield can stack with itself, so using something like Sacrificial Sword can actually be pretty solid. The stacking shield also plays into her first passive, which makes it so that on every impact you have with her hold skill, you'll gain a shield with 20% of the strength of Kirara's normal shield, which can add up. But what impact am I talking about? Not the impact the Ice Banner is having on your bank account, but just the impacts Kirara makes when she uses her hold skill. She becomes a box cat, not to be confused with a litter box. Come to think of it, how does she? While in her box state, she deals DENDRO damage when crashing into enemies. As far as energy goes, when using her hold skill, you generate 3 particles using this skill to begin with, a particle on the first crash, and 1 more particle every 4 seconds, depending on if you hit enemies again. Her hold skill does actually have a longer cooldown if you use it all up, but something interesting with her hold skill is that it actually doesn't trigger the longer skill cooldown right away. It does, however, give you an extra DENDRO particle on the first hit, so you can actually use her hold skill and immediately cancel it to get extra energy while still having the short skill cooldown. This, in my opinion, is the best way to play her off field, since it makes her need less energy to use her burst, but still keeps the same shield uptime. Oh, and also you can climb walls with it. It looks really dumb, and I love it. Now, speaking of her burst, this is what happens when you give Kirara catnip. Her burst has an absurdly high initial multiplier, and after it goes off, she creates a bunch of little mines that blow up on contact or over time. You can suck these up with animo characters like Kazuha, so that's an option that you have if you like to play that way. Her burst only costs 60 energy, so Kirara doesn't actually have super bad energy issues, and you'll want to burst often. Her passive makes it so that every 1000 max HP that Kirara has, she gains some more damage on her skill and burst. Now, it's not enough to make her want to focus on HP for damage, but it is a nice little bonus. Oh, and you can do this. Kirara's DENDRO application is nothing crazy, with the biggest downside being for consistent DENDRO, she has to be on the field. It sort of restricts her playstyle and synergies with certain weapons and artifact sets, but there's a lot of ways that you can use her in DENDRO archetypes, and she's actually a pretty solid character overall. So next up, let's go over her constellations, so that way you can understand what they do before we build her. Kirara doesn't really need constellations to function, but they do help her out a fair bit and make her a better character. Her C1 makes it so that she generates more grass bombs from her burst based on her HP, and in theory this would help with her ICD and apply more DENDRO, but it just ends up being a tiny bit more damage instead. C2 is a constellation in the game Genshin Impact. C3 is an increase in her skill level, which is good for her shields, and C4 is basically one of her best ones and also her funniest. It's a joke on Nahida's Seed of Skanda. Basically, whenever a character has a Kirara shield and hits enemies with any form of basic attack, the enemy gets hit for bonus DENDRO damage up to once every 3.8 seconds. This helps a fair bit with DENDRO application off field and can be a nice quality of life. C5 is a burst level increase, which helps with her insane scaling, and C6 is her other best constellation, which gives your party 12% all elemental damage bonus for 15 seconds after using her skill or burst. This is basically free damage bonus to everyone, and it's really good actually. Okay, fine, I'll actually talk about C2 as well. It's a co-op constellation. Basically, allies that you run into while in box form get a shield too. It's nothing insane, but if you play co-op, you know, that can be kind of nice, I guess. Overall, anything that you do get on Kirara constellation-wise isn't really huge until C4 or C6, so that's why I argue you don't really need them to make her good, because she's already fine at C0, and her first 3 constellations don't do much for her. But with that said, none of them do anything negative for her either, so, you know, they're all good. So now that you have full context for Kirara's kit, we can talk about her best artifacts. Kirara is actually really easy to build. For early game players before AR45, you're gonna want to just give her anything with HP on it just to make her shield stronger. But at AR45 though, when you can start farming for 5-star sets, you want to give her one of two main sets. If she's a solo Dendro in your team and you're using her with Nilou, she can use Deepwood Memories to reduce enemy Dendro resistance and increase your team's overall damage. But in basically any team outside of that, or if you're already using Deepwood on another character, you can give her 4-piece Noblesse Oblige for a team attack increase on her burst, which can be helpful in most teams. Alternatively, you can give her 2-piece Emblem of Severed Fate for ER, or a combination of HP % sets to make her shield bulkier. Now, I do want to make a quick note about this. You can run 4-piece Instructor as well, which can be a top option in something like a Nilou team to share EM with your team. But outside of that one niche, I don't particularly recommend it just because the stats will be lower on her because there's no 5-star instructors, and she won't be triggering a lot of reactions on field outside of Nilou teams. Now, as for stats, there's basically 2 builds you can go for. Because Kirara's shield is so strong and has solid uptime, you can go for a shield bot build where you use her in teams without a healer. For this, you want to just give her something like HP % on every piece to max out her shield strength. However, if you're playing her as a damage dealer, you can give her attack % or EM Sands, Dendro Damage Goblet, and a crit circlet. I don't particularly recommend this one, but it just is an option that you have if you're looking for a way to play her on field similarly to Sayu. And I guess technically you could do a hybrid where you give her HP % on the Sands, but in my experience testing her shield will be pretty weak with this build, and her damage will also be pretty low, so I suggest going in all HP % or all damage, but nothing in between. All HP % is comfiest and still lets her do her job. For sub-stats, you just want energy recharge up to around 130% first for full burst uptime. This should be doable in just substats. She doesn't need enough energy to where you have to run ER Sands unless you got just really incredibly unlucky. And other than that, you can just go for HP %, attack %, EM, crit, honestly just anything except defense and Vlad stats. Kirara has a ton of weapon options, not because she's super optimized for free-to-play players, but just because nothing really stands out on her. For those of you who have it, Ki is going to be her best option for a support build because it gives her a ton of HP and shares EM with the team, which is a valuable stat in most of her teams. Jade Cutter can also give her an HP bonus, so that can also be a solid option if you do have it. But outside of that, it kind of just doesn't really matter. You can give her Sacrificial Sword for energy particles, ER stat, and for the shield, but it's not super necessary. Fav is also an option that you have if you want to generate more particles for your team, but in a lot of teams you'll play her in, like Nilou teams or something with Fischl, you don't usually run into energy issues. You also have Sapwood Blade though, which is a craftable that meets her energy recharge needs and also shares EM with your team after she triggers a Dendro reaction. And for free-to-play players, this is most likely going to be your best option, but it's not really so significant that you have to craft the weapon if you don't already have it. I'm honestly just hoping that we get a craftable HP scaling sword in 4.0, but until then, the difference between the weapon options that you have are not that significant unless you're looking at the Ki versus anything else. But now that you know about her weapon options, her build and everything, let's talk about teams because there's a couple things to note about using Kirara that I think that you guys should know. So Kirara is a little bit more restricted than other Dendro units because her Dendro application is not that great by itself. However, that doesn't mean that she's useless in Dendro teams because she can do a lot for things like Nilou Bloom and in Quicken teams. So let me show you what I'm talking about. One of my favorite uses for Kirara is actually in a Keqing team. Now the reason for this is pretty straightforward. Basically, Kirara is going to allow you to not run a healer because she's going to just have her shield up most of the time. Activate teams have always had this issue where you can't really stay alive without a healer or a shielder. But to get the most optimal amount of damage, you've always wanted to run someone like Kazuha, so that way you can get the most damage out of your Fischl and Keqing, shredding enemy electro resistance, buffing electro damage, etc. And Yao Yao did kind of fix this problem. You could run Yao Yao here, but instead of Yao Yao, if you don't want to play Yao Yao, if you don't like her field time, you could play someone like Kirara who can be off field, still apply enough Dendro to be able to help you get your Quicken and Aggravates up, but also survive all of the waves of Spiral Abyss. This way you can run Sucrose or Kazuha and you're not at risk of dying because of how big her shield is. Now, one thing I do want to just quickly mention is that using her with someone like Cyno is not going to be as effective. The thing is that Cyno wants a ton of field time, and Kirara's shield, though it is very good, does not have enough uptime to sustain during all of Cyno's burst, and if you're going to be using all of Cyno's burst, you're going to have trouble not taking damage, which kind of makes the whole effect of Kirara not as good, and you'd rather just run a healer with Cyno, or someone that has a better uptime on their shield. Not saying you can't really do it, I'm just saying it's suboptimal. Now, another thing you can do is actually similar to this team, but actually replacing Keqing with Yaimiko. Now, if you do this, if you do replace Keqing with Yaimiko, Yamiko. Basically what this means is that you don't really have anyone to take up field time, and you can actually use Kirara's hold skill on field to trigger spreads and help apply Dendro. Now, it's not as perfect of a science as Kirara is just always gonna do spreads and things, but between Yamiko, Fischl, and Kirara, you're gonna be able to get a lot of reaction damage out, and then obviously Kazuha is gonna help with Yamiko and Fischl's damage, and this is a team that's specifically for if you want to play Kirara on field, if you want a player like Sai, where you can just hold her skill and run around and be funny box cat and do funny box cat things. Yamiko and Fischl are enough to carry this team's damage, but if you do get that Dendro in there, you get Kirara, it's gonna help out a lot. Alternatively, you could just play this team how it's designed and just use Yamiko on field, but I just wanted to throw that out there for people that wanted to play her on field. You can do something like this and it's fine, but Yamiko on field driving is still gonna be a pretty solid option for this. And again, it just keeps you alive because Kirara has a shield. And now the last archetype I wanted to talk about is a Nilou Bloom team. And now you actually have a lot of substitutes you can use for this. Basically, Nilou is a non-negotiable, but the thing with Kirara is if you're going to use her on field to try to drive Dendro and just, you know, hit enemies with Dendro over and over and over because it's funny, haha, box cat, you need characters that can apply Hydro on contact rather than on trigger. So that's actually why I'm using Barbara here, because it's really funny. You could play someone like Xingqiu, and he does have his rain swords, but the reason you wouldn't really use Xingqiu here is because if Kirara is on field, if this is your plan, is to use box cat on field, you're not gonna be able to trigger the rain swords on Xingqiu, and though you can wet enemies with contact with the rain swords, you might as well just use someone like Barbara for this, because then Xingqiu can go to your other team and you can still have like a really powerful other team to carry this team if it doesn't go well. Honestly, Nilou Bloom teams are really strong, and this can be a pretty effective team if you're just trying to clear AoE content. Now, you'll probably notice that I have Nahida here. The reason I have Nahida is because she's going to help out with the Dendro application a lot. In my opinion, Kirara's Dendro application isn't really enough to run her solo Dendro and 3 Hydro. You can do it, but I just don't really think it's worth it. You would be much better off having higher Dendro application. Nahida's still going to be able to trigger her skill off field, and she's going to be a solid option. But if you don't have Nahida, you could also run someone like Dendro MC. Dendro MC will help this a fair bit with Dendro application. And outside of that, you have your other Dendro units as well. You have Baiju, you have Kave. Yaoya, I wouldn't really recommend running with Kirara. It's just not really necessary. You have Alhaitham, who can also be really solid. And you have Kale. The thing is, if you are going to play someone on field, if you're just going to use Kirara to get her shield up, and then you're going to use something like Nahida or Alhaitham to drive, then you actually want to swap out Barbara and you want to go over to someone like Xingqiu, and that's going to help you out with your application a lot. So if you are going to use a separate Dendro driver that's not Kirara, then you actually just want to play someone that synergizes well and applies even more Hydro, because between Alhaitham and Kirara, with Xingqiu and Nilou, you will be getting a ton of blooms. You might be wondering about ownership of blooms though, and like why you would actually want to run 2 Dendro in a team like this. The reason is because ownership in bloom teams is just kind of a lie. Like, there's not really a point in trying to optimize who gets the bloom. You just want as many blooms as possible, because Nilou just makes that team archetype so dumb. Sure, you can run 1 Dendro character and then run 3 Hydro, but it's more important that you get more blooms than it is to get the highest damage blooms in this team, because optimizing that is just a huge pain in the butt, and most people are not going to do it 100% optimal, especially considering that enemies move around. Maybe you'll miss an enemy one time, maybe an enemy will separate itself from others. Realistically, just playing her triple HP is going to be the most helpful thing for you, because it's going to keep you alive, and just let all of the random blooms with high damage and your other characters, if they are built EM, really build up that overall bloom damage. So quite a few people are probably going to ask about Burgeon and Hyper Bloom, so I just want to quickly talk about why that's not optimal. The biggest issue that you're going to run into with something like Burgeon and Hyper Bloom is that you just don't have enough Dendro application with Kirara. You could hypothetically go Alhaitham if you wanted to with Xingqiu and Toma, but then at that point, if you're running Toma already, then Kirara's shield kind of doesn't really serve a purpose. And you could run other Burgeon units as well. I mean, I don't really consider Yomi a Burgeon unit, but like, let's say hypothetically you wanted to use her burst for Burgeon. The amount of Burgeon damage you're actually going to be getting over the 2-second trigger interval that Yomiya has, and between the application that you actually have, is just not going to be super worth it. And the same thing kind of applies to Hyper Bloom. You can do this stupid, like, little silly Hyper Fridge thing that I did. It's not very good, but like, it can be a little fun if you're just looking to run around on Box Cat. You hit enemies with the Hydro Ore from Barbara, you freeze them with Kaya, you get your Hyper Blooms. You know, it's funny, it's just not optimal, and you're not going to have a good time in Abyss. Do whatever you want, play the game however you want, but if you're trying to optimize Abyss, I don't recommend it. Kirara is one of the characters in Genshin Impact for sure. No, I'm just kidding. She's actually a good character, and you can find plenty of places to use her in different Dendro teams, though she's not going to be the most optimal for something like Burgeon or Hyper Bloom because her Dendro application is just really low. She's pretty good at helping you survive the tactical nuke that is Nilou teams, and she can be really great for something like Kuching Aggravate, where you're already swapping through characters a lot, and it allows you to run someone like Kazuha, who can help increase your damage even further. So anyways, if you guys have enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe down below, like the video so YouTube knows it doesn't suck, and I'll see you later.